barracks constructed.
Hello folks, Opus here, and welcome to another tutorial in a series on how to create, edit, and customize basic warfare missions of your own in Arma 2 and Operation Arrowhead. The first video of this series showed how to create basic warfare missions in the editor, but missions that are editor only don't provide respawn and don't have parameters to give the mission options, like victory conditions, number of towns on the map, or support selections. So this video is going to cover how to add those to your mission, how to change a basic warfare mission, which is editor only, into a regular warfare mission with respawn and optional parameters. This is done by adding a single file to the mission folder called a description.ext. For many, the description.ext file may already be familiar. Any multiplayer mission with respawn has to have one. But if not familiar, the Bohemia Interactive Community Wiki website, also known as the BIKI, has a page explaining it. YouTube also has some videos showing how to make a description file, but those pertain mostly to Arma 3. They tend to include various settings that Arma 2 and Arrowhead can't use. And the description.ext for warfare is unique on account of the parameter options it uses. I have yet to find a video showing how to set those up, so this video ought to help in that regard. Now, even though the description file has an extension of ext, it is a text record like a txt. You can use any simple text editor to open, edit, and save it. I use Notepad, and other people have apps they prefer, like Notepad++ and whatnot. Clicking on it, you might get the Open With dialog for an unknown file type. Select your text editor and check the box saying Always use this app. Then, clicking an ext file will always open it with your text editor. The description file is actually a config, and a config is different from a script. Scripts use variables, conditions, commands, and functions to make a mission run the way you want. But a config is more like a data sheet, laying out the attributes of something. It lists entries, which consist of attributes equal to a value. Like a car, color white, tires 4, seats 5, and a class is a defined container for certain things. Class motor, cylinders 4, class trunk, length, width, and depth. The game uses a config's entries to configure or set up whatever that particular config is designed for. A mission, a mod, add-ons, whatever. The description file is a mission config. It configures extra things for your mission, apart from the editor. Here on the BIKI page, you see entries listed for a description file. These are what you can configure. Click and it takes you to the entry. But with older games, like Arma 2 and Arrowhead, there are limitations. New entries keep getting introduced, but older games were only designed to handle entries that existed at their time. Icons on the left indicate when new entries became introduced, which game, which version. Many show icons for Arma 3, Take on Helicopters, or Operation Arrowhead. Keep these icons in mind when you consider using these entries, because Arma 2 alone isn't designed to handle entries introduced in Arrowhead. And both A2 and Arrowhead are not designed to handle entries for Arma 3 or Take on Helicopters. Those came later, and if you add an entry the game you're playing wasn't designed for, it doesn't work. You won't see the effect in game. Even so, Arma 2 and Arrowhead do use a number of these entries. Here, I'm only going to focus on those that pertain to warfare missions. That would be Respawn, the header class, and the params class, which provides the optional parameters. Now, the description.ext has rules you need to know of beforehand because they will mess with you if you don't follow them. For example, the only time a description file gets read is when a mission loads or gets saved. So if you're in the editor and step out to make a change, you have to save or reload the mission for that change to register. Preview without saving or reloading and the old value still applies. So save your change, save your mission, and then preview. Another is that most values for the attributes you give expect either numbers or a string, which is text wrapped inside of quotes, or an array. An array is a list of values. It means the attribute is not limited to a single value. It could have more. Or none at all, which is an empty array. With an array, each value within is separated by a comma. The last value is not followed by a comma. In a script, array values go inside square brackets, but in a config like the description.ext, square brackets at the end of an attribute's name indicate an array, and the list of values go inside curly brackets. When a class is declared, it also uses curly brackets to list the entries for that class. Arrays have a zero-based index. When counted, the count goes 1, 2, 3, 4, but when selected, the index starts at 0. It goes 0, 1, 2, 3. Whether an attribute is a number, a string, or an array, or when a class gets declared, each of these has to be closed out with a semicolon at the end. Now there are some exceptions. You can use true and false as values, but understand that true and false get converted to numbers. False gets read as 0, and true gets read as 1. In place of strings, you have the option of using string table keywords. The BIKI has a web page explaining string tables. They set your mission up to support different languages. It's why people see text in the language they choose: English, Czech, French, German, etc. If you add a string table to your mission, the mission will use it, but the game has several of its own, and you'll see that Warfare uses them for its text. String tables use key IDs, which is a keyword for what's being said. These keywords begin with str, but when used in a config like the description.ext, the keyword must begin with capital STR, and you put a $sign in front of the str. Then it searches for the keyword. Text quotes are optional when using a keyword. It'll search for the key whether quotes are used or not, but don't forget the $sign in front of capital STR, or it won't search, it just displays the keyword. When a keyword is used but not found, either in-game or in the mission, an empty string is returned, which is nothing. You'll see a blank entry. So you want to stick with keywords you know exist, either in-game or in your mission. When you don't have one, just use a regular string. Another important rule is that an attribute name or a class name has to be all one word. There can't be spaces breaking the name apart. For example, a respawn delay is 2 words, but there can't be a space in between. The attribute name has to be all one word. Same with class names. Victory time is 2 words, but there can't be a space in between. Must be all one word, otherwise you get a game freeze and a shutdown. Any config, like the description.ext, can be quite unforgiving over syntax errors. It has to be done correctly. Accidentally insert a space, leave out a comma, quote, or semicolon. The least little mistake can cause the game to freeze or shut down, so you have to pay close attention to syntax when you work on the file. I'll show an example. Here I've added a description file to the UTES mission from the prior video. I'll delete a semicolon from one of its entries and save. This represents a very simple mistake anyone can make in the syntax. Now I try saving the mission, but see what happens here. The mission freezes during save and I can't do anything. That's because a pop-up occurred in the background, but it doesn't show on screen. When I use Alt-Tab, Windows Aereo displays it instead of the game. Reading the pop-up in Aereo, I can see that an error was encountered in the description.ext. Not only that, the pop-up panel has a button on it, waiting to be acknowledged. That's why the game is frozen. The button has not been acknowledged. So I select the pop-up, and it takes me back to the game, still frozen. I don't see the pop-up, but it's there in the background. To push its button, I just hit the space bar. The button gets acknowledged and the game shuts down. That's what can happen when you have a simple error in your description file. The pop-up occurs, but you can't see it. Pressing the space bar acknowledges it, but then the game shuts down. Errors like this usually get logged in the game's RPT crash file. This file is a very useful debugging tool. You can review it with your text editor, and often it tells why an error occurred. The BIKI has a page to help you locate the RPT file in your computer profiles app data folders. From time to time you should check on this file. It's not unusual for it to get big. Clearing or deleting it is fine. It will regenerate as you play. Let me fix that error and do a different one. A space and a name. Save file and try launching the game. The game will launch. I select multiplayer, but when I try creating a game server, it freezes again. Once again, the error pops up in the background, but I can't see it. So in game, I hit the space bar and the game shuts down. I review the RPT file to find out why. Then I find and fix that error and save. Now that there's no error, I can launch and play the mission, no problem. So be careful when editing a description file. Check and double check, pay close attention to syntax for each entry. Now there's two ways of adding a description file to your mission. You're either going to right click and create a new one from scratch, or you're going to copy one over that already exists. Copying one over is best, you already know it works and doesn't have errors. Creating one from scratch, you have to be cautious. But what I'll do for this tutorial is actually a combination of both. I'll create one from scratch, but won't type it all out. I'm going to copy entries over piece by piece from one that already exists. And I'll explain what the nuances are for each entry while doing that. That's mainly for sake of the warfare params and the string table keywords warfare uses. Whether you choose to use keywords or not, you'll need to know what those entries are and how they reflect in game. When creating one from scratch, you need to have file extensions enabled. In Windows 10, open File Explorer, select the View tab, and make sure the File Name Extensions box is checked. Or in older versions of Windows, go to Start, type in Folder Options, select the View tab, and make sure the box Hide Extensions for known file types is not checked, and hit OK to confirm. This is important because Windows has file extensions hidden by default. You see the file's name, but not its extension. So when you save a text file as description.ext, what actually gets saved is a file named description.ext.txt, which will not work. By having file extensions enabled, you can see whether or not this happens and fix it whenever it does. Description.ext.txt is actually a very common reason why people's description files fail to work. With file extensions enabled, go to your mission file, right-click, and select New Text Document. Name your new record description.ext without the txt extension. Open it with your text editor and start editing. When done, save the file. But copying a file over is the easiest method. You go into an existing warfare mission that has a description file, copy and paste it over to your mission folder. Then open, edit to your liking, and save. The problem is, where would you get that very first mission folder with a description file that includes the unique warfare params? If you don't have one, there is a way you can get one. Fortunately, Bohemia Interactive, or BI, the developer of Arma, is extremely supportive of the creative community for their games. To help the community create mods for their games, they released sample content from their games under separate licenses for the community to download, use, learn from, and make mods with. And part of that content, or data, includes example warfare missions, which not only have description files with warfare params you can use, but also some scripts showing how to customize warfare to your own liking. The BIKI has a page called Public Data, explaining the content BI has released. It has links to the data packs and the licenses covering them. In the See Also section is a link to BI's Game Content Usage Rules, which has key information and frequently asked questions, or a facts section, well worth checking out. The data comes in zip file downloads, which contain PBO files. PBOs are familiar to those who use mods in Arma, but if not familiar, it's a unique file type BI uses in their games. A PBO is a container holding various file types the game uses: missions, configs, scripts, sounds, textures, terrain, and so on. To access the files in a PBO, you have to use an app designed for it. BI provides a tool with its Arma 3 Tools package on Steam, but if you don't have access to Arma 3 Tools, then you can use a community-made tool. Some are listed on the BIKI Community Tools page, though some links are now dead. And at times I still use PBO Manager by Wenceros, a version that's older than shown here. The data is released under BI's content licenses, which protect the intellectual property rights of BI and the creative community. They establish clear rules, terms, and conditions for using and sharing the data. These licenses are apart from, but go hand in hand with, the end-user license agreement for your game, which is quite strict. Don't tinker with the game files, don't distribute or share them in any way. Copyright, trademark, all that stuff. But these content licenses differ from the EULA. They cover BI's public data downloaded from the web, and are much more accommodating to support the creative community. The BIKI has a page called Licenses. This gives an overview of the content licenses and has links to some of them. Bohemia.net has the main page for all of the content licenses. Here you can also read the end-user license agreement for the BI tools. You can click to read any of these licenses, because one or another will apply to the PBOs contained in each download. And at the very bottom is another link to the data packs. The data pack we're interested in is this one here, the Arma License Data Pack, or ALDP. Bohemia.net or the BIKI website can get you there. The BIKI page is rather helpful in that it provides drop-down links listing the PBOs in each pack. The name of a PBO indicates what its contents relate to. The PBO we're interested in is called Warfare 2, and Warfare 2 is found under the A2 APLSA Part 3 link. If on Bohemia.net, look for this same download name. The name of a download indicates which license applies, and those can be read online before downloading. For whichever part of the data packs you intend to download, first review the license that applies to it. For this tutorial series, it would be the APLSA license. This particular download is Arma License Data Pack for Arma 2, PBOs under Arma and DayZ Public License Share Alike, and Arma Public License Share Alike, Part 3. The ADPLSA is a DayZ license. There are several on the licenses page, and this indicates that if you use this data for anything DayZ related, the ADPLSA license applies to that. Review that license. But this tutorial series won't have anything to do with DayZ at all, only stuff specific to warfare under the APLSA license. So if you follow the steps of this tutorial to download and use warfare data, go to the website and at least read and understand the Arma Public License Share Alike. Links are in the description below. Keep in mind, anything you see in this video could later become outdated, so always check and verify what is current. If you decide to download, choose where to store the zip file. Be aware it's quite a large download, 1.1 gigs. It'll take some time. It contains all of these PBOs. After download, you extract the zip file and use a PBO tool to access the files in the Warfare PBO. Then, as permitted by the license, you can copy a description file over to your Warfare mission. Let's take a moment to show that being done. Okay, my Warfare mission file is open here, and the scenario is this. I want to copy a description file over, not create one from scratch, but I don't have one with Warfare params. So I'd like to use the description file from the Warfare PBO example missions and customize it to my own liking. I've reviewed the licenses given in the download name and determined that the APLSA, Arma Public License Share Alike, applies to how I'll be using and sharing the data. I've read and agree with the license and have now downloaded the A2 APLSA Part 3 zip file to another folder. Select the file, the Extract tab appears. I extract all and choose where to extract. Creating a file here with the same name is fine. Hit Extract, and this takes a while. Some of the PBOs are big. Extraction done. Here's a copy of the license, a README file, and some web links, including one to the main licenses page. The Warfare 2 PBO is found in the folder at the bottom. So I've got the PBO, now to open it. If you have Arma 3 Tools on Steam, launch Arma 3 Tools and select BankRev. The panel pops up. In the upper right, click Add a Source Directory. Select the folder with the PBO and hit OK. On the left, you see all the PBOs in that folder listed and checked. Uncheck what you don't want extracted, only check the ones you want. Then check Custom and select a folder where you want the files to go. I select the same folder. OK. Bottom right, click Process Files and Yes. One file converted successfully would be the Warfare PBO. Close BankRev and Arma 3 Tools. In the target folder, a CA folder is created, and inside is a folder, Warfare 2, which contains the files from the PBO. First folder is Example Missions. Expand a mission and you find a description.ext file. Select and right-click Copy. Go to my mission folder and paste. Open, and now my mission has a description file with Warfare params. I can customize it to my own liking. Now further down here is an MP Missions folder with more example missions. These have description files too, but be aware the parameters used in these files are an older type which are quite limited. You should avoid those. I'll explain when we get into parameters. Mind you, the missions here are fine to copy over and learn from, but before launching you might want to swap the description file with one from the example missions folder. Last folder is scripts, and this contains hundreds of scripts that Warfare uses. We'll cover them when we get into customizing Warfare. Now if you can't use Arma 3 Tools, then you have to use one of the tools made by community members, and each one works differently. I have PBO Manager. I can click the green box and select a PBO to open. Or I also have it set so clicking a PBO opens it with Manager. Click plus to expand and it lists the folders and files. I can go into an example mission, right-click copy, and right-click paste the description file into my mission folder. Or I can right-click the PBO and there's an option to extract to Warfare 2. This option extracts all the files to a new folder created with the same name as the PBO. I select, and now there's a Warfare 2 folder created. Inside are the files from the PBO. Go to an example mission, copy the description file, and I can paste that into my mission folder. So that covers how you can get a Warfare description file without doing one from scratch. But if you're unable or unwilling to do that, then you have to start one from scratch. Let's go ahead and cover that. Alright, this is the Chernarus mission folder we saved in the first video of this series as Full Warfare. We're creating a description file from scratch. Right-click, New, Text Document, description.ext without the txt, and Open. Now I bring up the BIKI description file page, and for demonstration, the entries given here will be borrowed from a description file in the Warfare example missions. I'll explain the nuances of each entry and translate any string table keywords to English so you can see what their text is. Respawn related entries come first. The first entry is respawn. It sets the type of respawn a mission has. You can use a number or a string for this, either one works. There are 6 respawn types listed, but Warfare only allows base respawn, so the value will always be either 3 or base. It says here respawn markers are needed, but you don't have to worry about that in a Warfare mission. Warfare itself will create those markers. So first entry is respawn equals 3, or if you're using a string, it's respawn equals base. Next entry is respawn delay. This is how many seconds a player waits from the moment they're killed to the moment they respawn. Warfare uses 15 seconds. You can make it longer if you like, or shorter, but if you're going to make it shorter, keep in mind that players can respawn at friendly camps when one is close. They need enough time to pick a respawn point. So second entry is respawn delay equals 15, or however many seconds you want the delay to last. Last respawn entry is respawn dialog, but this entry is optional. You don't have to include it unless you want to. It determines whether players see their score when killed. The score appears at the top of the respawn map. The value is 1 or 0, true or false. The default is true, enabled. So if you leave this entry out, players will see their score. The only time you need to include it is when you don't want them to see their score. Then the entry is respawn dialog equals false, or 0. And that concludes the respawn entries. Save, and if you run the mission, respawn should work. Now the mission I copied this description file from has an entry for onload mission. That's just a loading screen message. I'm not going to include it. If you do choose to include it, the value is a string. Now we come to the header class. These show on the mission selection screen. A mission without a description file reflects unknown, unknown, and respawn none. Once respawn and the header class are added, they get reflected here. First, we declare class header, curly braces, and a semicolon. Then drop the braces down and the entries go inside. The word class is always lowercase, and with class or attribute names, I suggest you keep them as shown here in case the game ever looks for them in a case-sensitive way. The header has 3 entries: game type, min players, and max players. Game type first. A Warfare mission is always CTI for Capture the Island. There's an exception to string quotes here. You could type CTI as a string, or just type CTI. Either one works. Min players is the minimum number of players a mission supports. I've only ever seen it set to 1 for just 1 player. Max players should be the number of playable units your mission has. Mine has 24, so that's what I'll use. So game type is CTI. Min players is 1, but this has max players 16. I changed that to 24. Whenever you copy a description file over from one mission to another, you do want to review each entry and make sure it's correct for your mission. Now the header class is done. Save file, save mission, and when I step back, the information is reflected. Now we come to the parameters, which give a mission options. The BIKI has a mission parameters page explaining them, but Warfare handles parameters a certain way. So before copying these over, I need to explain how they're set up and how Warfare handles them. Parameters have a basic setup. Each gets defined by 4 entries, which combine in-game to create the options. First entry is the title, which is a string. It becomes the name displayed for the parameter. Then there are the texts, which is an array containing strings. Each text becomes an option the parameter has to choose from. When the choice is just a number, having it as a string is optional. A simple number gets handled as if it were a string. But parameters don't work with strings, they only work with numbers. So each text in the background has to have a number value assigned. Next entry is the values, an array of numbers matching up with each text. These numbers are the actual param options selected and used. So if a text is selected, the matching number becomes the actual parameter value. But if no selection is made, then there's the last entry, the default, which is a number automatically assigned to the parameter. The value only changes when a selection is made, otherwise the parameter uses its default value. In multiplayer, the admin or host can go through each parameter. The default is already selected. They can change it if they like. Whichever ones they don't change remain at the default. But in single player, there's no choosing of parameters. The default always gets used. To change an option in single player, you have to go to the description.ext and change the parameter's default value. So the default has to match one of the numbers listed in the values and should be the preferred setting for playing the mission. Now there's two types of params that can be used. Param1 and param2 are called primary params. They're the old way of doing parameters, been around since Operation Flashpoint. They consist of two sets of parameter entries, title, text, values, default. Then there's the params class, called secondary params. These get wrapped in the class params, then each set of entries get wrapped in a subclass of its own, so each parameter has a unique class name. When Arma 2 first came out, it was using param1 and param2, and the description files in Warfare's MP missions folder still have those. But they were quite limited. Only 2 parameters existed. If mission makers wanted more options, they had to cram them into those 2 parameters, like this option plus that option plus another option. Secondary params were introduced in Arma 2 version 103 and changed all that. Now with the params class, a mission could have an unlimited number of parameters. So secondary params are actually far better than primary params. Now whether a mission has a description file or not, certain variables get created at mission start. These variables are param1, param2, and params array. When parameters don't exist, param1 and param2 both default to 0, and params array defaults to an empty array. The parameters you add to a description file pass their chosen values to these variables in sequence. Primary params first, then secondary. If param1 exists, the variable param1 becomes the chosen value, and it goes into the params array. If param2 exists, then variable param2 becomes the chosen value, and it goes into the params array. Then, if the params class exists, each of its chosen values go into the params array, in sequence, first to last. So param1 will either be 0 or the value selected, and param2 will either be 0 or the value selected. But params array will only list values for parameters that exist in the description file. When param1 and 2 are not used, they don't get listed. Now in order for parameters to work, a mission must have a script. Without a script, parameters only update the variables. The purpose of the script is to handle each parameter according to the number given from its values. It's the mission script that actually makes parameters work. But you don't have to create a script to handle Warfare's parameters. That script already exists. It's part of Warfare. The init mission SQF in the scripts folder will handle them. The only time you have to do a script to handle params is when you add custom parameters of your own, apart from the Warfare parameters. On mission launch, the Warfare script sets basic param defaults, which get used when no parameters exist, like in editor-only basic Warfare missions. Adding params in a description file will override these basic defaults, but that depends on which type and how many parameters get used. Warfare has a set of primary params, which could be used, but I don't recommend that. Or it has 15 secondary params, which should be used, and I recommend using those. You can also use custom parameters of your own, but then you have to add a mission script of your own to handle them. Warfare will only handle its own parameters. You have to handle the rest. And because of how Warfare handles its params, there are some specific rules to follow. Warfare uses param1 and param2 to handle primary params. It uses params array to handle secondary params, but only when there are more than 12 parameters. 12 or less are considered custom params, where you do the script. 13 or more, and it handles all 15 of its secondary params from first to last. It's a little confusing, so here are the rules. First rule is that all of Warfare's params, whether primary or secondary, must remain in sequence. Don't shift their order around or swap one with another. The script handles them in sequence and expects them to be in sequence. Shifting them around will screw up the param handling. Second rule is you cannot use Warfare's primary and secondary params together. Use one or the other, but not both. That's because primary params go into params array first, then secondary. When both get listed together, it totally screws up Warfare's handling of secondary params. Third rule is that if you use primary params, they must be Warfare's params found in the MP missions folder. They cannot be custom params of your own. The script specifically handles primary params as being Warfare's params. So any custom params you add have to be classed in the secondary params. Fourth rule is that when you don't want to use Warfare's secondary params, you're limited to 12 parameters max, because more than 12 will get handled by Warfare. So you could have 2 primary params plus up to 10 custom params, or you can have up to 12 custom params of your own. But more than that, and Warfare's secondary params handling will kick in, so they must be included. Fifth rule is that Warfare's secondary params always come first in the params classes. No custom params can be put before them. It handles the first 15 as being Warfare's params from first to last. After that, you can add as many custom params as you want. It's unlimited. Sixth rule is that when using Warfare's secondary params, the 14th and 15th parameters are mandatory when adding custom params. Otherwise, they're optional. You don't have to include them when you're not adding custom params. But you must include at least 13 out of the 15, or they don't get handled at all. 12 or less are considered custom params. Now, if you want to use Warfare's primary params, you have to copy a description file from Warfare's MP missions folder, because I'm only going to show setup for secondary params. I'm not going to show primary param setup at all. They're limited, they're outdated, and every option they provide is included in the secondary params, which do them much better. But if you're nostalgic or curious and you do choose to use primary params, just be aware that you'll need to enable support so that the no artillery option actually serves its purpose. Warfare's artillery is disabled by default. Secondary params will automatically enable it when you select a cost, free, cheap, normal, or expensive, but primary params don't. With those, you have to enable support by setting a cost value before the Warfare script runs. To do that, add this line of code to the Warfare inet field in Editor. If param1 is not equal 0, then BIS Warfare support level equals 1, 2, 3, or 4. You decide which number to use. 1 is free, 2 is cheap, 3 is normal, and 4 is expensive. I'll explain what the actual costs are when dealing with support in the secondary params. Now I'll copy over the secondary params. First we create the class params. Inside this we put each of the parameter classes. I'll sort them in order of title, text, values, and default so you can better see how they relate, and tell you the basic default that Warfare uses when params don't exist. Okay, here we go. First is class victory time. It gives the mission a time limit. If nobody has won when time is reached, the side with highest combined player scores wins. Only player scores count, not AI. The values here are minutes, and -1 disables it. Warfare's basic default is -1, disabled. String Warfare mission end time is time until mission ends. String Warfare NA is NA, not applicable. Now you can edit the texts and values for this param. For some params you can only edit the texts, not the values. Just remember, this param applies to victory time, nothing else. You can change these to what you like, add more, or remove them if you want, but you should keep the -1. It's the basic default. And remember to keep values matched with their text. In the end, each text should have a matching value. Last thing is to make sure the default value is what you prefer for the mission. Second class is victory score. It sets a score limit on the mission. A side whose combined player scores reaches this limit wins. Again, only player scores count. The values here are combined scores for a side, and -1 disables it. Warfare's basic default is -1, disabled. String warfare score needed is score needed for victory. String warfare NA is NA. Check that the default is what you want. Third param class is victory towns. First side to hold this number of towns wins. Whether a town is under attack doesn't matter. What matters is who owns the town. The values are how many towns a side must own, and -1 disables it. Warfare's basic default is -1, disabled. String warfare towns needed is towns needed for victory. String warfare NA is NA. String warfare all is all. Now 1000, which you see here, represents all towns. Capture every town on the map to win. However, this victory condition doesn't work when the value exceeds the actual number of towns on the map. So you might want to review and edit this parameter for each mission or map you do. However many towns exist on a map is the highest number that should be in here. My mission is on Chernarus, which has 46 capturable towns. For that, I change this number to 46. Then selecting all towns will work. Takistan only has 24 capturable towns, so change this to 24. But then you have these other values that exceed 24. You might want to remove those so they can't get selected. You decide how to handle it, but keep in mind if the value selected exceeds the number of capturable towns, this victory condition doesn't work. Last, check the default is what you want. The fourth param class is capturable towns. This sets the max number of towns appearing on the map. A map could have 100 towns laid out, but with a selection picked here, only that many towns will appear. The values are the number of towns to appear. -1 has all towns appear. Warfare's basic default is -1, all towns. String warfare towns present is capturable towns present. String warfare all is all. Now this parameter can accidentally disable victory towns when a wrong selection is made. For example, I set a town victory at 30, but then I only allow 20 towns on the map. Now the town victory won't work because the number of towns needed to win exceeds the number of towns available. It's something to watch for. When a map doesn't have this many towns, you can adjust these numbers if you want, but it's really not necessary. If a number picked here exceeds the number of towns on a map, all towns will appear. Last, check that the default is what you want. For my own missions, I prefer all towns, so I set this to -1. Fifth param class is faster time. This is time compression. It speeds up the day-night cycles so players can experience a little of both while they play. The values are how many hours for a full day-night cycle to rotate. 1 means a full day-night cycle in 1 hour of gameplay. 4 means a full cycle over 4 hours of gameplay. 0.5 is a half-hour cycle, and 0.25 is a quarter-hour cycle, 15 minutes, quite fast. 0 disables this parameter, and Warfare's basic default is 0, disabled. String Warfare param 1C is fast time. String Warfare off is off. String Warfare fast time 15 is 15 minutes equal 1 day. Fast time 30 is 30 minutes equal 1 day. 60 is 1 hour equals 1 day. 120 is 2 hours equal 1 day. And 240 is 4 hours equals 1 day. And check that the default is what you want. Sixth param class is min starting distance. This increases or decreases the minimum distance between bases at mission start. So bases might get placed closer together, or it will ensure that they're further apart. A lower setting doesn't mean they will be closer together. It means they can be closer. Random placement will do as it does, and this affects the minimum range apart. The normal minimum is 2,000 meters, or 2 kilometers. The values are how much to add or subtract from 2,000. 0 means no change, and Warfare's basic default is 0, no change. String Warfare min start distance is minimum starting distance. String Warfare mission default is mission default. String Warfare very low is very low, low is low, medium is medium, high is high, and very high is very high. Now on a small map, you might want to adjust these values. You wouldn't want a high value chosen that could disqualify almost every starting position. And check that the default is what you want. Seventh param class is MISC settings. This decides whether terrain has grass and towns have civilians. Having them is more immersive, but if the server drags, try turning these off. The values are whole numbers, 0, 1, 2, and 3. You cannot change these. Each number acts like a switch. Grass or civilians switch on or switch off. Warfare's basic default is 0, meaning both are switched on. String Warfare MISC settings is MISC settings. String Warfare all on is all on. All off is all off. No civs is no civilians. And no grass is no grass. You can change the text if you like. Now on maps designed for Arrowhead, civilians don't show up. It's because Warfare uses Arma 2's module to create civilians, but Arrowhead maps require the expansion module, and Warfare doesn't use it. So on maps like Takistan, the civilian setting doesn't work. The wrong module gets used. To resolve that, add an ambient civilians expansion module to the map and put this code in its condition of presence field. Is not nil bis Warfare OA, and if count params array greater than 12, then params array select 6 in O3, else true. Customizing a script in Warfare can make it so the module isn't needed, and if we get to scripting, I hope to show that in another video. Check that the default is what you want. 8th param class is neutral opposition. This increases or decreases the number of patrols each town has, but player sides don't get affected. They get the regular number of patrols. The values are whole numbers. Each town is allotted 4 different patrols. This number adds or removes from those 4. Warfare's basic default is 0. None added, none removed. String Warfare neutral opposition is neutral town opposition. String Warfare very low is very low, low is low, normal is normal, medium is medium, high is high, and very high is very high. Now having more town patrols can be a greater challenge, but could also drag on the server. Keep that in mind. And check that the default is what you want. 9th param class is side color scheme. This determines how units get shown on the map. Relative color shows them as friend or foe, friendly in green, enemy in red. Absolute color shows their side, blue for blue, op for red, independent green. And diplomacy tells you who's friend or foe. The values are 0 for absolute color and 1 for relative color. These cannot be changed. Warfare's basic default is 0 for absolute color, showing their side. The text can be changed. String Warfare side color scheme is side color scheme. String Warfare absolute colors is red/green/blue. String Warfare relative colors is red/green. And check that the default is what you want. The 10th param class is start time. This sets the time a mission starts. The values are how many hours past midnight. So 0 would be midnight, 7 would be 7 a.m. or 7 hours past midnight, and 18 would be 18 hours after midnight or 6 p.m. -1 will use the time set in the editor, and 100 causes a random time of day or night. Warfare's basic default is -1, time set in the editor. String Warfare start time is mission starting time. String Warfare mission default is mission default. Random is random, early morning is early morning, morning is morning, early afternoon is early afternoon, afternoon is afternoon, late afternoon is late afternoon, evening is evening, night is night, and late night is late night. Check that the default is what you want. The 11th param class is support. This allows players to use supports when they exist and can afford them. The values here cannot be changed. Whole numbers 1 through 4 are used by a switch to adjust the cost of Warfare support. Warfare only has artillery configured, but with custom scripting others can be added. Their cost would get switched as well. 0 disables all support, and -1 is mission default, indicating a different support system is being used, either SecOps supports or support through a mod. Warfare's basic default is 0, no support. String Warfare support is support available. String Warfare mission default is mission default. None is none, free is free, cheap is cheap, normal is normal, and expensive is expensive. Now a few things to be aware of here. Warfare's artillery normally costs $1,000 for a fire mission. Cheap means half normal cost, or $500. Expensive means 3 times normal cost, or $3,000. The switch only responds to numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Any other values besides 0 get ignored. The response in game would be mission default support. And finally, when mission default is selected, support could be from SecOps or it could be from a mod. Warfare needs to know when it is SecOps, because then it keeps and updates the support menu. The SecOps support menu gets activated for a mission by adding this code to Warfare's init field. If count params array greater than 12, then if params array select 10 is less than 0, then BIS Warfare old support level equals 1. Now check that the default is what you want. The 12th param class is town spawn range. This increases or decreases how far enemies have to be from a town for defense teams to spawn in. It also affects the range of town patrols. The values are numbers used in math equations to set the ranges. 0 is a town's normal range, a positive number increases range, and a negative number decreases it. Warfare's basic mission default is 0, no change. String Warfare town range is town defense range. String Warfare very low is very low. Low is low, normal is normal, medium is medium, high is high, and very high is very high. Now I'm not going to explain the math equations. Suffice to say each town is different. One factor is the number of houses a town has. So if you want to tinker with these numbers, you got to use trial and error. And keep in mind, having enemies spawn sooner might be more immersive but can drag on a server. Check that the default is what you want. Okay, right now I've got 12 parameters. I save file, save mission, and preview. There's my parameters. Select a late night mission, OK, back, and OK, but it's daytime, 7 a.m. That's because 12 parameters or less are custom parameters. You have to do the script. Warfare won't handle them. Has to be at least 13 params for Warfare's handling to kick in. The 13th param class is town spawn time. This is how long town defense teams stay on the map after enemies go out of range. Normally they hang around 2.5 minutes, which is 150 seconds. The values are how many seconds get added or removed from 150. Warfare's basic mission default is 0, no change. String Warfare town time is town defense time. String Warfare very low is very low. Low is low, normal is normal, medium is medium, high is high, and very high is very high. And again, keeping enemies on the map longer can be more immersive but drag on a server. Check that the default is what you want. And that completes the 13 mandatory params. Save file, save mission, and preview. Now if I switch to a night mission, it works. My basic Warfare mission in Editor has now become a regular mission with respawn and Warfare parameters. Now these last two parameters are optional when you're not adding custom params, but if you do add custom params, they both become mandatory and have to be included. Warfare will handle all 15 of its params. When these get excluded, their basic default gets used. But it's generally better to include these and only exclude them if there's a particular reason you don't want them as options in your mission. These last two are actually part of some different options Warfare has that can be activated apart from using params. Warfare contains various gameplay options that can be activated by defining certain variables before its mission script runs. Defining them in the Warfare module's init field will do that. But these two are also set up to be handled by the mission script as params, which is nice. It provides an example of how some other options can be activated using custom params. The 14th param class is Game Mode. This activates Warfare's enhanced co-op mode. It's meant for co-op players who want a heavier challenge playing against AI. Sides that have no players at mission start get extra teams and resources added. The values are 0 and 1. Cannot be changed. 0 turns the mode off, 1 turns it on. Warfare's basic default is 0, turned off. String MP type co-op is cooperative mission. String Warfare no is no, and String Warfare yes is yes. Now this game mode gets enhanced by adding neutral town opposition. The number of teams added, which is normally 4, gets multiplied by the opposition value whenever that number is positive. There is a limit though. The max a side can gain is 16 extra teams. Consider that when placing sides on a map. Think of the team counts, because Warfare can only handle a max of 32 teams per side, including the base defense teams. More than that causes issues to happen in game. And check that the default is what you want. The final and 15th param class is Limited Warfare. This is a game mode for strategic and tactical players. Teams start with high resources, but then gain little income. So they need to make smart decisions with what they've got, since gaining more is tough. Each loss could impact the outcome. The values are again 0 and 1, cannot be changed. 0 turns the mode off, 1 turns it on. Warfare's basic default is 0, turned off. Now for those playing Arma 2 alone, this keyword here is an issue. Anytime you see EP1, it means the string comes from Arrowhead. And that's fine if you have Arrowhead, but if you only have Arma 2, it won't work. The keyword doesn't get found, so all you see is a blank space. Click on it and the options are there, but the name itself is empty, so how would you know what they're for? So use whatever works. If your mission is only intended for OA or combined ops, this is fine. String EP1 Warfare Limited Warfare is Limited Warfare. But for missions playable in Arma 2, remove the underscore EP1. String Warfare Limited Warfare is Arma 2's keyword for Limited Warfare. Or if you like, just type the string, Limited Warfare. String Warfare No is No, and String Warfare Yes is Yes. And check that the default is what you want. And that concludes the last warfare parameter. Save file, save mission, preview, go to the parameters, and you should see all 15 listed. The mission is ready to play. At this point, I can now start adding custom parameters, as many as I like, there's no limit. I'm going to show a simple one to add, an option that can enhance the cooperative mission mode. Defend base is a mode that eliminates the minimum distance between bases, so they could end up quite close, maybe. But when combined with co-op mode, it reveals any player bases to the AI-only sides, so attacks against the base could start coming early on. Again, random placement does as it will, and that will affect how soon the attacks start coming. To add the param class, I just copy and paste the last one. Each class name and title must be unique, so I rename its class to Defend Base. Title, I can use keyword String Warfare Defend Base or the string Defend Base. The text, values, and default will be the same. Save file, and now this param needs to be handled. Warfare won't do it, I need to do it. Normally, parameter handling is done in a script file, but we're not there yet. So what I'll do is put this code in Warfare's init field instead. The code works here because it uses one of the option variables mentioned earlier that Warfare has. By default, it is set false, turned off. But instead of simply defining it as true, in which case the option would always be turned on when the mission is played, I'll make it so it only gets defined true when the custom parameter is enabled. If count params array greater than 15, then if params array select 15 is equal 1, then BIS Warfare Defend the Base mode equals true. Remember, arrays have a zero-based index, so the 16th counted param gets selected at index 15. Now I save the mission. Preview, and there in the parameters is my custom param, and the mission is ready to play. And that concludes how to change an editor-only basic warfare mission into a regular one by adding a description file to the mission folder. Again, I know this video is really long for the simple purpose it serves, but hopefully the extra information given is found useful by some. Shorter and simpler videos are coming. The next one will deal with adding start locations and capture sites to a map, how to set up warfare on an empty map, or move things around on a full map. I hope this video was found helpful to some of you warfare warriors out there, whoever and wherever you may be. Have fun gaming, and until next time, Opus out.